Welcome to part two then of the transactional model. We've already covered part one. If you haven't seen that, if you got to this video without seeing that one, you need to go back and watch part one that deals with the whole transactional model process, and it gets into channels. And I might say while I'm at this, you obviously have the luxury here of stopping and starting and reviewing and going back. And if you didn't understand something, and I encourage you to go through and do that. One of the luxuries you have of taking this class online is to be able to go through and do that with the discussion or with a lecture that is going on, and certainly with these videos here. So to make sure that you're comprehensive in getting the material down, start and stop and make sure you got your notes complete as we go along. So speaking of notes, at this point you should have something that looks like this, okay, with on one page that gets into the transactional model. And for this video, for part two, we're going to get into what's called context. And I'm going to represent that by having this box appear around this dyad, the two circles that we have. We'll call this context. Context is, out of the model, there are two really important things, more so than channels or the transactional model, that kind of thing. At least I believe that's the case, because without them we don't have meaning. And that's what context does for us. It provides meaning. You've heard the word context before, maybe out of context, no pun intended, or you've been taken out of context, but maybe you don't really know what that means or have an understanding of that. So I'm going to get into a number of different contexts to study here that through which we triangulate meaning. We find meaning in different levels, from physical to social, psychological, cultural. It's across the spectrum. And so each one of these brings a different aspect of our being able to arrive at shared meaning. And so I'm going to break all these down. You don't need to write them all down right now. Let's start with one, and I'll go through each one. Physical, the physical context. And this is the easiest one out of them all to understand. The physical context is where communication takes place. Write that down. Physical context, where communication takes place. And where the physical context of just about any environment that we get into is set up. It's structured to some type of an end, some type of experience, some type of facilitation, some type of cognitive learning effect, which we'll get into here later on as well. So, for example, I'm going to start off with religious context. I'm going to get into some others, like this one. Okay, here it's a wonderful grand cathedral. I think this is Notre Dame in Paris. I've been there. It's sensational. I've been to a lot of cathedrals throughout Northern Europe, and they are specifically designed to diminish you, the human being, to make you feel small, to kind of give you perspective, to put you into your puny place. Some of you might be familiar with this context. It's an LDS chapel. Or some of you might be familiar with this context. It's a synagogue. This is a beautiful synagogue in Las Vegas, by the way. I've attended there, and it's really quite an experience. Or maybe this experience. Notice the vacancy. Okay, there's no seating there because they don't sit, they kneel. There's in getting engaged in the prayer situation, this is set up for that, versus this or this or this. All right, so these very specific physical contexts are established to go through and facilitate a means, and in this case, it's a means of worship. All right, so let's shift gears. Let's go to this context. Okay, you might recognize this as this is a standard Chili's environment, and we can make this application to Applebee's or any kind of sports bar really that's set up to go through, get people seated, make them feel comfortable, but to get them out of there quickly. Okay, so we can rotate tables and make more money over a condensed period of time. And now they've gone to these devices that you interface with, where you can set your order, you could pay there, it gets you in and gets you out faster, which is interesting to go through. But that's what that context is set up to do. Okay, the very physical design of this restaurant. What's interesting is to see how this is kind of spilling a little bit over into fast food, where we're seeing fast food restaurants now upscaling in terms of the textiles that they're using, the hard surfaces that they're putting into, the furnishings, that kind of thing. It's growing up and becoming someplace that's a little bit more enjoyable than just the plastic fiberglass seating that we had going on. Even here, I think this is it's an Oriental fast food. I can't remember what it was, but it's again set up to go through and merge and flow individuals around through there, access to drinks and things that way. But the bright colors and the music involved and the lighting involved is set up also to kind of rotate them out, get them on their way. Our homes are set up specifically to go through and create a physical context where we can communicate. And the center of most homes is the kitchen, the hearth, as it were. Okay, and for some people, unfortunately, it's where the computer is or where the big screen is. But the conversation happens in an environment like this, and this is designed to go through and to cook, to engage in that olfactory and that gustatory channel, and then to talk as well. It's the most important room in our house is the kitchen area that way. You might be living in a dorm or some kind of college housing, or you've been in such, and it's set up, again, specifically to accommodate your needs on a very basic level. Okay, you need to sleep, you need to study, and maybe occasionally your need to eat, and your need to maybe be distracted, in terms of entertainment, that kind of thing. So the physical context serves a number of purposes. Typically, it's designed specifically to reach those purposes, and with those physical contexts, there are certain laws, rules that go with that as well. We behave differently at Chili's than we do in a synagogue, for example. Okay, we're not the same people at a cemetery as we might be at a playground. So none of these contexts are mutually exclusive. Okay, they run over, they spill over into each other in terms of how we derive meaning out of that. Maybe you've never been to a mosque, and maybe you don't know how to behave in that. And so without maybe a temporal context or a cultural context with that, the physical context isn't going to do enough for you. So we need to have more context in order for you to understand what's going on. So let's talk about more context here. The second one, and the one that we will be spending the majority amount of time with in terms of interpersonal communication, is the psychological context. And this is critical. The psychological context is the thought and emotional process that you are experiencing in a communicative exchange. And even before and after that communicative exchange. Okay, it could be your fears, it could be your ambitions, it could be love, it could be disdain, it could be all kinds of things. But while we are engaged with somebody else, they have brought to that dyad a psychological context, and we have brought a psychological context to that dyad, and maybe those two cross over. Okay, maybe there's some overlap, and within that we might find empathy, for example, or we might find a better ability to listen. Or if we're not crossing over, it might be difficult for us to come to a shared meeting, or even to go through and to listen to somebody. I'm going to stop there in terms of the psychological context, because this class really deals with a lot of content within that psychological context. Okay. Well, okay. Tell you what. Let me give you an example of the psychological context that I'm currently going through. All right. This is my daughter, Addie. She graduated from Pineview High School, and soon she's going to basic training in the military. That's right. And she's going into military intelligence. And with that military intelligence, she's tested out with the Department of Defense to learn Korean. And with Korean, she's going to go through a lot of specialized training and then go into covert operations there for the United States of America. And well, I'm very proud of her. I'm so proud of her, and she's incredibly capable of doing everything we've just talked about. I worry, and that's psychological context. I don't just worry about her. I worry about this guy. This is my son, and he's a sheriff's deputy, and he is in the line of fire every day as well. So, at the forefront of my psychological context, no matter where I am or who I'm talking to, okay, these two are there like a song going along, and I have to assuage a little bit of that fear that I'm feeling by checking in, texting, calling, visiting, seeing what's going on. But that's what the psychological context does to us. Next is the social context. This is I'm trying to rank these, but this is just as important as the psychological context. It's the relationships that we have. okay? And the roles that we play within those relationships. And it deals with the rules that we've agreed upon within those relationships as well, all right? So this is my sweet companion, Mindy, and myself. So this is one type of dyad, one type of relationship in terms of companions, husband, wife, best friends, that kind of thing, okay? And you've already met my kids, but so this is a different familial context in terms of our social context. My kids, son and daughter and father, that goes through and brings in a whole different type of behavior, maybe than what I had with my spouse, okay? So we're communicating differently. And then I also have stepkids, okay? These are my wife's 3 kids. And there is a different dynamic with them. I try not to be, but there is with them than there is with my own kids. As much as we try to blend our families together, there's a different dynamic. And if you've been in a blended family, and half of you have been, according to the statistics, you know what I'm talking about there. It's fascinating. And so with these, there are different relationships, but they're all underscored by love, by this familial love that's going on. And then I'm a friend. Okay, and with that friend comes other types of expectations, or maybe the fewer expectations we have, the easier the friendship is. I'm a teacher and mentor to my students in a number of classes in mediated studies. I love to mountain bike, and so that's part of my social identity there as well. I'm a talk show host on television. I do a weekly show, and so there's an identity there and rules that go along with that. I'm a musician. I played in a band. I play the piano. I used to be a filmmaker. I've traveled the world. All these are roles. Okay, there's social roles that we have, regardless of what we do in terms of work, in terms of our study, whatever we engage in. Fundamentally, we are all children, okay? We belong in a family. And for me to define family would be pretty futile, because that definition can only be defined by the people who are in that group, right? So I don't believe blood has to exist. I mean, there's a number of things. Here, obviously, blood exists. This is my family. I'm the kid in the middle in the blue jacket. My dad, my sister, my mom and my brother and my oldest sister there. And with this, and there's a reason why this is here, and there's a reason why I'm being vulnerable with this and putting this out there and letting myself be seen, is because this is where we figure out the rules for the most part. We figure out the rules of how to treat each other. We figure out the rules of boundaries and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And we do that through experience and through discipline and through vacations and through schooling and through chores and through all kinds of things. And the 2 people, the mom and the dad in this picture, they bring in a whole host of experience from their very different contexts as well, social and culturally. My father from the Young line of Brigham Young in Mormon culture, and my mother from the Ukraine and Russia, and then Lutheranism that's introduced into this. I'll get into this a little bit later on as well. But man, all kinds of things set up. And then the roles change. And as we all got older, my mother, for example, got cancer and became debilitated as a result of that. And then my sister and myself became her primary caregivers up until the time that she had passed away. So those roles reversed. And it was a fascinating experience within this. All of these have rules attached to them as well, like I'm trying to get into. The rules of integrity and honesty and unconditional love, the rules of being open and being available. What's going the wrong way? The rules here of going through and just trying to do your best to be a parent and to be there no matter what. Well, the no matter what applies to friends as well. The rules of appropriateness in working with students and providing a curriculum and a structure and a way to assess that. The rules of not falling off your damn bike while you're riding on a trail that you could kill yourself on. The rules of not swearing while on television, while I'm doing a talk show with my co-host Jennifer Kohler here. The rules of music. I can't sit there and play whatever it is that I want to play. We all have to get together. The rules of filmmaking, of exposure and light and just the whole process of what goes on. All this falls under that social context, and it's very complicated. The next context is this idea of the cultural context, and I kind of hinted to this a little bit in terms of what we bring, our own culture and what we bring into a relationship. I showed you my family. This is my other family. This is my Tongan family. And this is on the island of Tonga Tapu in the Kingdom of Tonga. I was dispatched there as a cinematographer to shoot a series of documentaries there on Tongan culture. And while there, knowing absolutely nothing about Tonga, I got the call, and the day after, I was on my way to Lae, Hawaii, to learn a little bit more. And the day after that, I was on an airplane to the island of Tonga. And I've had great experiences with Tongan students, but knew very little about the culture, of which I was now contracted to go through and shoot and cover in a documentary. So within that culture, and as you might have seen through these images, the grace, the loveliness, the color, the dancing, the costumes, it could all be pretty overwhelming in trying to go through and capture what's going on. To be as they're called, a palangi, and then to be immersed into that without much background, it forces you to go through and learn really what needs to happen. There's some interesting exchanges there that happened before they really invited us into their Tongan family circles, and now we're in. There's also a culture involved in most careers like filmmaking. There's a culture there as well. There are corporate cultures that are out there that give a sense of values, of creativity, of an ability to communicate and work back and forth and see what's going on. Here I am with my sound man Matt as we're getting set ready to do an interview. Once we got beyond maybe some of those cultural differences, we became assimilated. And this is something that takes time to do. We were there for about 4 or 5 weeks. And it's unusual for assimilation to happen in that period of time. It usually takes us about 5 to 6 months for us to, especially in terms of language and food and things that way. But just extraordinary people, very open. And my film crew was as well, and so we were able to mesh and get together. Other cultural things might be like Thanksgiving. Food certainly is a cultural thing. The biggest cultural food for me is waffles, and not what we eat here in America. I'm talking about real Liège waffles, okay, which are now popping up here and there. Culture can be a way of life. Here's my daughter. She's on a cattle drive, moving cattle across the Arizona Strip, and there's a whole different set of rules there with what's going on at a different language, different clothes, and different food as well. It happens just within that culture. And the vehicle here lends itself to another microculture. My wife and I do what's called overlanding exploring, where the majority of our travel is off-road. We're self-sustained within our vehicle. When we get places, we like to go out and explore them, especially within our kayaks. Kayaking is another subculture. Okay, Lake Powell is a subculture. Many of you are involved in perhaps recreating out there. Our hiking, where we live, is a culture. How we live in those domiciles goes through and has some cultural elements. If we're living together within a shared space, or if we're affluent and living in a mansion, or just a tract house, whatever the case might be, all of those different environments bring along a different cultural context to them. Culture is embedded with ritual. Culture is embedded with spirituality. The way we deal with our dead is very cultural, and what that harks back to and what that means to us, and then comes into perhaps one of the greatest cultural influences that we have out there, which is religion. And we live in a society where it takes religion and economics and everything else and it smashes it all together, while we try to go through and see what crosses over ethically, perhaps from religion into business or into government or into family, and how we go through and arrange that. What we believe really determines our cultural standpoint, from our view on how we exist, from where we came from where we might be going to our own politics become very imbued within our religions. The cultural context is I'm trying to rank these and I really can't. They're all excruciatingly important. The next one and the last one is the temporal context. And this one's kind of funky. And the word temporal is kind of a misnomer in a way. If you think of it in terms of time, time has an impact, has a contextual impact on how we communicate. Some people communicate better in the morning, some people communicate better in the afternoon, some people communicate better at night, okay? And we have seasonal context as well. Here's Ginger and Marianne, my two golden retrievers. This is out in the foothills behind where we live. In the fall, and then this is their first experience with snow, and this was their first experience really with these incredibly blooming flowers here just a couple of weeks ago up on the same foothills. They respond differently physiologically. We respond differently to weather, to what's going on. The temporal context, we might have certain habits within that temporal context, like we take a vacation the same time every year. We go to the beach in California. Here you see Marianne photobombing us in this selfie behind us there. The temporal context also can go through and take all of those other contexts and combine them together and arrive at an extraordinary meaning. This, for example, this is a lantern festival that my wife and I attended a number of years ago. And the overall experience of that, when we went from day to night, and when we lit the torches and we filled the lanterns with the hot air, and then to release that temporally, and to the symbolism of that, and all those, there were thousands of lanterns that went up into the air, was absolutely extraordinary. It all came together from that temporal experience to create a meaningful experience for us that we will never forget. So that's it for the context, for the contextual part then of this. If you have any questions about it, go back, rewatch it. Feel free to email me or to pull us up in a discussion where we can talk about it. Okay. Up next is part 3 that gets into noise and the effects of communication. We'll see you there.